AI is really just datasets referencing datasets. What is a cup of coffee? Well, is it just a cup with a brown liquid in it? Or do I really mean a Starbucks cup of coffee with a little green mermaid on the front of it? Is that the definition of coffee?
So AI is all the rage, and that's all anybody seems to be talking about anymore at this point. What is fascinating, I mean, one of the big things that's worth talking about, Ars Technica did a really good article how ChatGPT turned generative AI into an anything tool. And they go through step by step of before this point, before a lot of these tools were released and before it was essentially consumer ready, you had AI that was, I am hyper specialized for search. It is, I'm doing this one thing and we have a data model for it. We are in medical. We have all these inputs and it is here. We have a data model specifically for medical, specifically for search, specifically for stock market predictability, whatever it was, there's all these inputs. We're doing one thing. And what ChatGPT has done has essentially turned it on its head, and now you have open access to a general tool where I no longer have to be a specialist in order to use the tool. At this point, I'm just some guy who isn't a clinician, who isn't a statistician, and I could say, hey, I need this AI tool to do this thing, utilizing that same probability software, and I still get massive benefit out of it as just a regular consumer.
Yeah, and I think one of the key things to understand with the idea of a generative AI system is that it is a generalized model, right? Where AI is really just datasets referencing datasets. But this idea of we're trying to learn what is a cup of coffee. Well, is it just a cup with a brown liquid in it, or is there a specialized brown liquid? What does the dataset tell me? How do I, as a computer, understand that this dataset is not tea? Or do I really mean a Starbucks cup of coffee with a little green mermaid on the front of it? Is that the definition of coffee? And then we can even take it one step further of, okay, so I said I want a query of coffee. What was the actual desired response? And that's where this generative thing comes into play of it is learning what the expected outcome is in a more human function to make it easier for the general consumer to access these types of data sets or technology use cases, like you said, in a more generalized form, where we no longer have to be specialists or clinicians, but we have access to tools that can help us in day-to-day operations.
And I think what gets lost as we talk about it in a very, it is a thing that does thing kind of way. ChatGPT, the prime example of it figures out, it takes a prompt and it writes it for you. And there's a lot of, wow, that's crazy, but how does it do that?
Yeah.
It's a lot of predictive math. It's math upon math upon math with so many inputs that it has an idea, but it's still, at the end of the day, a program that is taking inputs and putting something out. Like, it's not making this stuff up in the way that we would, in our novelty, do it. So, for example, one day I had fun with a prompt. I used it to assist in just writing a general overview for an event just to see what would happen. And then, cheeky as I am, I said, now write this in the style of Neil Gaiman. And it did very well. But I'd say, how would you do that? You would need to have the inputs of how he writes, and you could see kind of based on how it turned out, it was clearly some of his best written works, pulling from it, even to a degree, some of the lines were pulled in. It's like, okay, great. So this is something that it kind of sounds in his voice. How would you do that? Well, you have the input. He's an author, so you take a bunch of his writing and therefore you have it. So if you have access to literature, it makes it a lot easier to stand out and create these kind of narratives that almost make it look like magic. End of the day, there's a lot more literature in inputs than we give ourselves credit for. That we can get things like this that look like magic, but it's just there's so many data points. It makes it easy to develop the background math basis to create the thing.